He was one of the 5,000 that got caught up in the power outage. And so Ben is, Ed hopes to join us, but doesn't know whether that will happen or not. And we're going to go ahead and get started with this new adventure. Let's talk bees. And so Cheryl sent out the request for questions, and we got quite a few of them. So we're going to ask some questions. We're going to ask the board members, and they're going to chime in as they feel so inclined. And if you have a question now, either a clarification about one of the questions that's been answered, or you have a new question that you'd like to pose, you can type it into the chat room. So it's usually kind of at the bottom of your screen. So click on the chat and type away. So this first question comes to us from Daryl Ward, and I don't know whether Daryl's here today, but Daryl, this is his question. He said, I just installed a package of bees last week. When do I start thinking about varroa, hive beetles, mites, etc.? And is there a timetable I should be following? We have somebody that wants to jump in on that. Go, Cheryl.
Some of the recommendations have been to go ahead and treat your package before your queen has her first eggs capped over. And after she's been in the hive, I wouldn't do it right at the beginning of introduction, but if you wanted to, first I'd do a mite test to even see if you had an issue. Colony is going to continue to grow, so usually they far exceed their mite issues this time of year. It's later in the late summer, early fall that our brood or our bee population starts to decline and dwindle, but yet the mite population starts to explode. So we usually see problems more late summer, early fall if you don't get on top of them. But a lot of beekeepers will suggest either, Jolie, do you trickle packages or I usually sublimate packages, but do you guys still trickle?
No, we trickled the first year and we didn't see the results we thought we should see. And so the last 2 years we've used one treatment after the queen is out laying and she's already been accepted. We've done one treatment of the Apogard, the thymol treatment.
Oh, okay.
That was a half a treatment though. Weren't we using a half a treatment?
Right.
Right, Jolie? Yeah.
Right.
What about on a swarm?
Didn't use a full 10, just a half of it.
What about if you caught a swarm? What would you consider treating them?
Probably you could, and lots of times, depending on the time of year it is, they might have absconded because of varroa issues. And so it's probably good to check because, you may have a lot of treatment-free beekeepers around your area and they might have pretty good mite loads. So it would be worth.
Again, I would wait till she's
until
accepted and rocking and rolling before.
Right. And a lot depends. You're going to assume if it's a swarm that you've got a mated queen, but you could have an after swarm with a virgin queen that has to go out and get mated. So I wouldn't want to disrupt that.
Of course, if you treated for in the spring your own bees and you're catching your own swarms, they should be okay.
Right.
So
right,
yes,
Becky?
Steve, yours should be okay.
What's your favorite timeline? Who do you go to, Cheryl? It's our time to advertise. Who do we talk about when we want to know about all things mite?
Be informed.
The Bee Informed Partnership, Honeybee Health Coalition.
Yeah.
So,
and they have an interactive, on their website, they have an interactive tool that you can walk through, or if you want the full booklet, you can even print out the booklet and have it at your disposal. So
free information. If you can't find that link, ask some of us, because tell you what, it's something we refer to often. People ask me what treatment or how long for this treatment. I don't know. I have to look it up. So just check it out. Okay, thanks. Next question is, I'm feeding my bees simple syrup solution. I'm guessing that's a 1-to-1 simple syrup. They go through roughly a pint every 2 days. Is this normal consumption? What do you think, Steve Musburger?
Well, it's probably normal, but here's one thing that I have learned is
Kind of neat how they call people.
bees are hoarders. They'll, even 1-to-1, I've seen them store it. I think and with the nectar flow coming, you're gonna have to be real careful when you do your inspection. Make sure that
Yeah, I'm on.
they're not storing that where the queen needs to lay. That's, and it's an issue. We talk about feed, but I think you have to do it at a reasonable rate that they're not storing it, they're using it.
I think that's good advice. Anybody else want to weigh in on that about normal consumption? Okay. Well, let's move on. Then Dan Johnson asked us a question. He said, we requeened with a marked queen about 3 weeks ago. Removed and killed the old queen. I noticed when we opened up the hive yesterday, we found the queen, but she had no marking on her thorax. Does the marking come off easily? We also removed all the queen and supersedure cells when we introduced the new queen. We were wondering if this could have been a new queen or had the marking just come off. Jolie, what do you think about that?
Sorry, the dog. I'm
Right.
giving the dogs peanut butter bones because they're growling in the background. so we think that trying to keep the noise level down.
Oh.
We think that bees will occasionally chew the mark off the queen, and so it could still be your original queen in there. You just sometimes you can see a little bit and sometimes you can't.
We've seen just a pretty lake of paint left on, so you knew that it was, on there and it was that queen, but it was so little paint left that you could hardly tell it was there.
So your answer is a definite maybe.
A definite possibility.
Yeah. Okay. That's kind of what, yeah. When you've had, it's so easy to miss a queen cell or a supersedure cell, and that can happen just so easy. So it could just be either way. It really could
And
be.
if it was in 3 weeks, she would be real little. So if you had
That's true.
a fat queen, they just took the marking off. I had some one year, they were green, and I don't think any of them lasted. So they do remove it, especially depending on what he used to mark it with too. So just
all true. All true. Good points. So this next question, I'm not sure who wrote this, so we're just going to jump right into it. I've always wondered how an egg laid in a hive becomes a queen cell, which is located on the bottom of the hive usually. There are many cells with eggs in them. So do the bees build the queen cell first, and the queen lays an egg in it, and then the bees grow it into a queen? In other words, she is laying an egg that will be her replacement. Or will the egg already be laid on the edge of the frame in an existing cell, and then the rest of the workers build the queen cell out from there to get it onto the bottom of the frame? So which came first, the queen or the egg? Queen cell or the egg? Hey, Joe, we haven't heard from you. Joe Patrick, are you there?
Where'd Joe go?
I don't know.
see her pretty face though.
No, she didn't want to see her pretty face. Cecil, do you have a good answer?
It actually depends on why they are making a queen cell.
Mhm.
If it is a swarm cell, the bees will build cups and the queen will lay in there. But if it's emergency queen, they'll actually take the young larva and build a queen cell around that young larva. So it just depends on why they are raising this queen. Same with, supersedure cells. They'll do that, sometimes they'll just stick cups around in the hive, and never put anything in it. But yeah, it just, so it's both ways. They'll build a cell around the thing, or the queen will lay in for a swarm cell. She'll actually lay in that, and they'll raise queens from that.
Those that are on the face, you can almost see them being pulled out from the
Mhm.
cell as it started. So yeah, it's why. So why are they doing this? Kind of gives us a clue. Ashley sent us the next question. We have a feeder and our bees keep drawing in the feeder. We have put cinder blocks and bricks on top of our hive, thinking it wasn't closing tightly enough, but they still seem to get in there and die. Anyone else have this experience or advice? Jolie said, I have had this experience. Give us the lowdown, Jolie.
So this year we got top feeders for the youth scholarship kids from Dadant, and it's a new feeder. This was like the first year we've seen it. And so it's got this square black thing in the middle, and several of our youth scholarship students, you have to turn it a certain way, otherwise the bees can get up through the top and down into the syrup. So yesterday we saw on one of the kids, and we turned it a quarter turn, and a little black thing comes up at the top and blocks the bees from coming out. So youth scholarship mentors and youth scholarship students, look at yours, because it's just, we dump the syrup out, turn the feeder, turn the black plastic thing, the white plastic thing, isn't it black?
Well, there's the clear, did you take the clear plastic box out of the center?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it has to be turned a certain way so that these little clips stick up in those holes.
So the
If
bees
it's
can't
turned
get out.
the other way, bee can actually crawl through.
Yeah, well, you guys know, if you're using the other top feeders, I think the one Man Lake sells, you have to caulk around that screen on both sides. They find a way in there. I learned it the hard way. You open up and there's bees in there. If you have that screened one in the middle, you have to caulk. I caulk all the way from the bottom all the way up and over to the other side on both sides. Because they
Is that
just
what the
find a
newer
little spot
models?
to get in.
Is the newer models better though, Steve? The
I
Man Lakes
still do.
ones I had were horrible.
Yeah, and I still do that because that screen still doesn't quite fit up in the top corners. So I still do the caulking. It's just I hate losing any bees, and
Yeah.
and I know it happens. And if something's a little off kilter, they like to get in there. But the only thing, Jolie, I thought they could improve on that data was to move that opening down to the very end, because what we're seeing is we all tilt our hives to the front. That syrup runs down to the front and they can't get to it.
Yeah,
That was the only issue I've seen with that at this point. But I didn't know about that locking thing, so that's.
Yeah, we didn't tell yesterday, so it was good to know.
Jolie, you still recommend not to use an inner cover with those feeders.
Yeah, we think with the top feeder, you shouldn't use the inner cover.
Right. I read somebody had a question and they didn't understand why Robert Hughes had told them not to use an inner cover on there. But
we think
yeah.
that sometimes the bees can get up under and then come down through the hole in the inner cover if you use it with a
Yeah,
feeder.
I think the person was having issues with the mold or the mildew, which usually isn't a big deal. It's more bothersome to the beekeeper than it is to the bees. But when they don't get really good ventilation up there. But you don't want ventilation up there, or else you get bees in your syrup. So
Well, you know what? If they add a teaspoon of vinegar
Right.
in it,
right,
it'll cure that mold and crystallizing.
right.
But you don't want very much. That's to a gallon. A little teaspoon to a gallon is what we use. I did notice Nebraska in their meeting, they also mentioned that too.
hmm
That's a good tip, that's for sure. Okay, Michelle has a question for us. She asks, how do I know when it's officially honey flow and time to stop feeding and put supers on? And then she went on to put in parentheses, outside of Becky posting on Facebook. Thanks, Michelle. So Robert, you've talked about this a lot recently. What's going on? Can you talk about when the honey flow was starting? Are you there, Robert?
I can't hear him.
I
He
can't
probably
either.
needs to unmute himself.
Well, it shows him unmuted. But I
Did you
still
mute yourself, Robert?
Okay, somebody else jump in. Matt, how about you? Are you listening? Haven't heard from you either.
Matt's got a presentation to do on our monthly meeting on that.
Yeah. So usually, probably the key indicator for me is usually white wax. Like I open the top lid,
That's
you
a
just
good.
see white on everything. It almost looks like it snowed white wax in your beehive. It's usually that's usually not, I guess, my first indicator, but it's usually like, hey, I have my honey supers on. They're probably going to be bringing in honey, right? So probably, but usually my key indicator is usually just seeing the flowers around the yard. I say yard and around me because I live in the city. So I'll see Dutch clover, dandelions. Typically, a lot of it happens after the red buds are done blooming. So usually that's a time frame for me to go, I need to add honey supers. So usually I keep my eye out for that to happen, the white wax, and then obviously make sure that I have a queen in my box. I mean, if you don't have a queen actively laying, there's no point in putting honey supers on until she's there.
So we've had some people confused by this because we have all said, you want your bees to draw wax, you feed them. So if I'm a brand new beekeeper and I'm slapping a super on this hive, it's all empty. It's just got plain foundation. And they want to continue feeding at that point. And there's kind of a disconnect of why not. And so what do you tell them?
So if I'm feeding a beehive that needs to draw comb, I'm going to take off my feeder once that second box has, got 2 or 3 frames of foundation that's left that needs to be filled. And that's probably going to be about 2 weeks out from honey flow starting. So that would probably be right about now, because we're going to have a week of cooler weather and then it's going to warm up. So that gives the bees two weeks to consume the sugar water that's in their beehive and continue to bring nectar in. So they're not putting that honey in any of your honey supers.
And I think that's what we really want to avoid. You don't want to make honey that is sugar syrup honey. That's
Right.
not honey. So we have to get rid of that. And I know that those first years, man, it seems like they will never draw those supers out, but you can't give them syrup while they're doing it. So that's kind
Right.
of what we use, is that, white wax. Look for that white wax and the flowers. So this is also from Michelle. And she says, I'm coming into spring with a couple of very full hives. One had even swarmed already last weekend. I felt like I should add a super this week to give them more space. So do we super hives to give them more space? Matt, why don't you continue with, if we see what Michelle's answer.
I have super to give space. That's usually, it usually doesn't help. I mean, at least in my experience, I mean, it has, but typically their urge to reproduce is stronger than you just stacking supers on top of the beehive. I hate to tell you. I actually did that with one of my beehives recently, and lo and behold, they were gone. So I was like, well, time to pull the honey supers back off and figure out what the heck's going on with these girls. And they did have capped queen cells in there, so I just moved them to a different beehive that needed them.
There was a pretty good article in ABJ maybe this last month that talked about swarming, and this person was really advocating putting on a super to help with that area to store honey above the brood chamber. And it's an interesting article. Steve was talking about it. I have to go find it to be more exact. I'll try to look that up and write about it.
I think there might be a fine line with when they're packing honey in the brood nest and when you put that honey super on, because I think if they start storing honey and then you try to put the honey super on, I think you're too late. I think you got to get them a week or so before that, where they're actually, instead of making that honey arch that we're used to seeing, that has to be in the honey super for you to curb that swarm.
I agree. I think you're right. And that it's a very fine line. So I don't have a person on this next question. I don't know who, I'm not saying who wrote it, I guess is what I want to say, but I do think it's a good question. I think I see Joe though now. So let's see if Joe will answer this one for me. I went out to give my bees more syrup this morning. They came boiling out of the hive and I was stung over 20 times. Is this normal behavior? They have always been so gentle. Do I have a hot hive?
They're so ungrateful.
They are so ungrateful.
Here you come to feed them. Well, was that this morning? Because this morning the weather was pretty darn crummy. And I'm sure all the hives were in foul moods. And also, did you smoke them before you entered the hive? And what type of feeder were you using and so forth? So would I say you had a hot hive? Not necessarily. It could have just been you caught them on a bad day.
I hear that all the time. I don't suit up to go work my bees. They're so nice and sweet. They have tempers just like us, and usually this kind of weather has a tendency to tick them off a little bit. I always tell people, I said, you only have two eyes. So put a veil on or something, no matter what you're doing. But that's why I like top feeders, because I don't have to worry about that. With a top feeder, you just slide the lid back, add some syrup, you're done. Bees can't get you because they can't come through it.
There's a little bit more information to this that I know that isn't in the question because I followed up on it. It was a top feeder, but she had not pushed the hive together correctly, and there was a lot of burr comb so that it was actually ajar. And then she kind of pushed it back into place, and they all went like, welcome to our world.
Yeah.
And so there were several things. She didn't smoke them. She wasn't wearing her veil. And all of that combined to, she learned a valuable lesson that morning. So it was not a good thing.
I went out on a swarm last week and they had been out in a cedar tree this was the third day, and it rained that night. And I have never suited up to catch a swarm. Believe me, they weren't very happy. I got 9 times on my arm. Ooh. I kept my composure and set the hive down, and I walked back to the truck. The people were watching me, and I said, I've caught 50 swarms and never had this. So don't tell anybody that happened.
Well, that's
you don't know when they're going to be in a bad mood. That's
another factor. Since we're in grass growing season, that's another factor is, did you mow the yard last night? And did you make them agitated over that? There's stuff that can happen all the time. and they don't forget. At least not for a while.
They don't like weed eaters, I know that.
No,
Oh,
no, no.
There's a couple other reasons, possibilities too. If a hive is getting ready to swarm, sometimes they're pretty nasty. If they're queenless, they can be pretty nasty, have the buzz. And Cecil just mentioned if there's a skunk bothering them at night or something like that, sometimes those will tick them off too. So
Yeah, that's why I wear a suit.
all good points, that's for sure. And it is, so let's take precautions. That's just it, to be that. So very good. I like those comments. What should we go next? Jim Guthrie says, I'd be interested in hearing thoughts about primary swarms versus secondary swarms. How are they similar? How are they different? And 2 of the last 3 springs, he's had both. Yep, that does happen. Robert, did you ever unmute yourself?
Let's find out. Can you hear me now?
Yay! Robert, tell us about primary swarms and secondary swarms.
Yes, a couple years ago, it seemed like everybody had primary and secondary swarms, and it seems like this year there might be a few secondary swarms going on. Primarily, a primary swarm is going to be your largest. It will leave with the queen, the established queen that's been in your hive that season and from last year. And perhaps because they have so many extra queen cells after that primary swarm is left, you've got so many virgins running around, and you've got a lot of new bees that have hatched out recently, and the population's big enough, they think they can do it again. So they'll take a few virgins with them, or at least one, and do what we call a secondary swarm. It could be a third swarm also after that, but generally European honeybees only swarm once, 2 or 3 times at the most. The virgins probably, by the time they get to their location, have duked it out, and there's probably one surviving left, and then she'll have to mate. But it's generally smaller than your primary swarm, and about generally a week later than when your primary swarm would have left also. So
From our chat, Robert, it says, does a hive form queen cells before it swarms, or does it form cells after the swarm? Would you like to add on to that?
Well, they like to make sure that they're going to have a queen before they leave.
Yep.
So they do it before.
And Robert, I guess this is a question. I've also heard that sometimes when there's multiple queens in the hive, virgin queens, that they're fighting and they decide, hey, I don't want to fight. I'm just going to go and take some bees with me. Is there any thoughts on that?
I don't know. Well, I don't think the queens are the ones that decide whether they're going to swarm or not. It's the ruling class of the bees that make that decision generally, because they push the queens out to make them go with them. But you know, it's all interesting, and I think we're in that time period now where last week we had a lot of primary swarms, and there were a lot the week before that too, but it should be slowing down. And the secondary swarms, you may see a couple. I think I've seen a couple, because for this season, all the swarms have been huge to me, been very large. And the smaller ones that I've seen, you know, I think have been the primary. At least that's what I've observed.
I think Juliana talked about that as being one of the things that's really still a mystery. And there are many things in beekeeping that are a mystery. Why we get these hives that will swarm and then swarm again and then swarm again, and what that's doing. Jim asks, would you be interested in capturing a primary versus a secondary swarm? And the answer is yes, I'm interested in capturing. But the secondary you mentioned has likelihood of having a virgin queen. So then she would have to get mated, and it's going to be a while till that might go down. So
yes,
but one of those.
You have a better shot with us than by themselves. So, you know, even if you have to baby that secondary swarm through the season and it makes it through to next year, you just added to your colonies. So, you know, I'll take any of them that come along.
Well, and I keep a regular 10 frame hive, and I've got a 5 frame nuke. And If it looks like it's a secondary swarm and they'll easily fit in the nuke, I'd rather use the nuke,
Mhm.
get them started, and then
Good plan.
Hey, Becky, Alicia had a comment in the chat about what to do after your hive swarmed. I think it might be a good thing to talk about for some of the new beekeepers. What do you do once your hive has swarmed?
This is a good time to talk about it. Go, guys.
Cry.
Throw your hands up in the air. Roll
I
your
cry,
eyes.
but I do say a few words. I can't say it
Dang.
now.
I like it. I've been able to give bees to a few friends that needed them. So,
That's generous. That's generous.
well, I'm full up.
But
How
Trip,
long after a hive swarms should you wait to check it?
At least 2 weeks.
I agree.
and so that is the,
After
once
hive
they've
swarms, yeah,
swarmed,
2 weeks.
there
Yeah.
isn't a whole lot to do in there for a little while. Would everybody agree that once they've gone, it's like,
And
it's hard.
You can get in there and do an inspection, but if you do it right after they swarm, you're possible to damage all of your good swarm cells
Mhm.
by doing that. So you run a risk there. I've seen hives requeen as soon as 2 weeks. I wouldn't get excited even waiting 3.
Mhm.
So
Well, I my experience is typically you don't want to be in the beehive for those 2 weeks either because they're not very happy.
they're cranky.
Yeah, because they leave behind the youngest bees and the oldest bees. So the ones that don't know how to fight, and then the ones that really know how to fight are usually the ones that are left over.
Well, you're not going to do any good to go through it anyway. You go
Right.
back 2 weeks and see if your queen's made it.
Right.
Hopefully she has. So you know.
Your next strategy is find eggs. Look for eggs. See if you got them.
Make sure that
Yeah.
And with that, Becky, and I've talked to a lot of them, and they think doing an inspection means going through the whole hive, both boxes and stuff like that. That is not what your inspection is usually about, unless there's something you're absolutely looking for. Like Becky said, I take one frame out and I go right to the brood chamber and I look for egg. If I see an egg sticking straight up, she was there 24 hours ago. I'm done. I'm putting it back. So the more you dig through it, if you're just looking around, you bigger chance of killing your queen.
Yeah, that is true. That's
And
true.
I'm
as
just
well.
I'm just telling people because what my experiences of talking to people and working with them, you dig around too long, it's always that one bee that we kill.
and those virgins like to run around and
Um,
hide until they
Oh.
get fat and loaded down. They're kind of hard to find in one place, and they usually like to run to the corner of the frame or a corner in the box or to the outside frames.
They
Down to the
go
bottom.
everywhere, don't they? They're running around with their heads cut off trying to get all the other queens. Yeah, they're a lot smaller. You got to have a good eye.
Or they're out on a mating flight because that's usually when we like to check bees.
I
It's in the
I found
afternoon.
them, and I found them on the very far on the honey. I found virgin queens anywhere in that hive, so it's really not worth digging around looking for her. You get lucky, you see her.
I'm not that lucky. So Randy would like to know how much 1-to-1 syrup do you give splits? He said, I have provided them with built comb, so drawn out comb, and they seem to just be clogging the brood area with syrup. What do you suggest?
Stop feeding.
Yeah, stop feeding.
Yeah. I think you have to be in your hive and you have to see, are they hungry? Are they not hungry? And you want to make sure that, but if they start filling up your brood area,
And one thing,
Or are they ready for their second box?
yes, yeah, something else.
one thing I've seen on sugar water, the longer it's in there, it gets thicker. I think the water evaporates out of it, and I've seen it get thicker. So they'll store it.
Yeah.
So That's why I say you do your inspections and make sure that they're not hoarding it where she needs to be laying.
This is next question is from Jeff, and I thought it was an interesting question. He said, I combined a weak queenless colony with a stronger queen right colony. A week later, the queen is gone and no brood. Why was she killed? I placed newspaper between the hive bodies. The queen was grown by the hive, so self-requeen, and at least 1 week old before combining. I think that's significant. What did I miss? And should the strong hive have brood before a weak hive is added? What do you think?
So it was still a virgin queen? Is that what you think he meant?
I don't know if it was a virgin queen, but if it was, he said
You
A
didn't
week
have
old,
brood.
yeah.
it was not very old. So if it wasn't a virgin, I don't think there was any brood or any emerging brood from the queen in the queen right colony. So the term queen right, I think, is something that probably means something different to a lot of us. To me, a queen right colony is I'm seeing all stages of brood. And
Right.
so
Wait a minute, maybe I'm getting this wrong, but would a week later you go in, there's no brood or nothing? So
So there
that's a very short period of time.
there
Did
wasn't
I
any
get,
brood. Yeah.
maybe I didn't get the question right.
Well, I think what he's done is he's had a brand new queen and he combined it with this weak colony, and then they killed the queen. But she was a brand new queen because he said then we got it in a
But
week.
that was
absolutely
in
no
the
brood.
small hive that he was combining?
The medium hive, the bigger hive, had a brand new queen, and he was combining it with the small hive, and the combine went badly because she wasn't an accepted queen. She wasn't a strong queen. The whole complexion, I think, of your hive changes once that queen has emerging brood. I think that makes her less likely to be superseded once her brood is emerging. I think that's why, and sometimes in new packages, we
Yeah, I
see
agree.
problems with like supersedure cells until this queen gets some brood built up in there. So I don't know. That's just it. So queen right colony is not just that there's a queen, but there's a queen that's with all
Right.
stages of brood.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Do you think that he added a new queen to the bottom colony and then added the lesser colony to that on top of that with the paper?
I don't know. I don't know
That's-
which
Yeah.
one he put on top. I don't know. I wasn't given that information. I don't know, but that might have been significant too.
That could be a lot of changes to do at once.
I think like what you're saying is is there a preference for adding the stronger colony when you're merging them to the top or the bottom and the weaker one with
Well,
or
I'm-
without the queen?
I'm
Do
quite it's a good idea. All.
What do you think, Robert? Which one do you think would be preferable?
Well, I recall it. I seem to recall that reading is that like if you're merging, for example, you got two queen right colonies, and you're merging them in the fall. That typically the good queen is going to survive, and she's the one that's on the top box.
Mm-hmm. I remember hearing that as well. That
Stronger colony on the top box.
Okay.
so
We
I-
always do it the other way.
Do
We
you?
always do the
Bottom?
strong one on top.
No, the
On the
bottom.
the strong on the bottom, I mean.
The bottom.
Yeah.
What'd
then
you
it
say,
probably doesn't
Jolie?
matter.
Huh?
She puts the strong one on the bottom.
The stronger one on the
The
bottom.
strong
yeah.
colony on the bottom.
We always kill the other queen too.
But we usually kill the other queen too.
Right.
What
And-
my question is did he get a new queen, put it on the bottom colony, and then he had a weaker colony, like maybe he did a split and something didn't go right, and then he put that colony on top of that with paper in between?
Yeah, that's what he did.
Vicky thought that he still maybe had a virgin queen and she wasn't laying yet. And that's
Yeah.
probably the reason that it wasn't.
Yeah,
I'm
that's what
gonna see if
he
he.
bought a queen, put it in with a split that he did, or somebody split, and then had something else that had bees in it, and he put that on top and tried to merge them together.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't see Jeff is with us online this evening, but that's his question.
Yeah, we'd have to verify that with him.
Yeah.
So we'll have to ask Jeff how he did that. He can talk about that. So this is from Jay. And Jay asks, when making a split into a nuke box, you're taking 5 frames of brood, bees, and food and moving them into a box that only holds 5 frames. Provided the queen is hatched, mated, and productive, it's only going to be a short time before this environment is overcrowded. Why not move them into a deep box instead? So why use a nuke? Carol, you use a lot of nukes. You got an opinion?
Well, it depends. Is he adding 5 more frames of drawn comb to that split, or is he using foundation that they have to draw out? Because you've got to maintain. We have comb management is what I like to call it. I don't know if that's the right wording, but you want enough bees to manage the comb that's there. So if you were adding it to a 10 frame that was all drawn comb, you may not have enough bees to adequately police all of that comb. But if he's adding foundation, I mean, I suppose you could go ahead and put it in a 10 frame to make a split. If you're to keep it and gonna keep it in a single spot in the colony, I preferably like when I make splits, I'm lots of times selling that queen at some time later. I find that they draw the frames out. If I'm gonna top super with 5 frames and we get in a nectar flow next week or the week after, that they'll draw those frames out faster because bees like to chimney up. So I tend to want a super 5/5 before I break them down into a 10 frame, but that's just my preference.
I like to do that too.
Yeah, they also, I think also temperature, and do they have enough to keep everything warm?
Right, right.
Put them in a bigger box, it gives them too much area to try to keep warm, keeping them in a smaller box.
In the spring, I think
Yeah.
temperature regulation's better in a smaller box too.
All good considerations. I think small hive beetle, that comb management can be an issue. Any of those in your nuke is easier for the bees to manipulate. But
Becky, I lost my hives because hive beetles killed my bees. But you might answer that question, okay?
Go for it, Steve. Tell us. They kill. Oh,
They don't. It's a secondary predator. There's something else wrong with your hive. Small hive beetles and wax moths do not kill hives. There was a primary problem before, and they just took advantage of the weakness.
If you are making a nuke in a yard that has some powerhouse colonies and they have small beetles, and then you put that little nuke in this same yard, you can be asking for some issues. I mean, the strong colonies may want to rob out that nuke, so you need to protect that. And that's a good reason to use your little nuke hive to do that. But the small hive beetles can also take advantage of that very small colony. So,
Steve, your turn's coming.
I'm sorry, what?
Your turn is coming.
My turn is coming.
You're going to lose a hive to small hive beetle.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? No, I usually lose them to wax moths by the time I find them.
Oh, the beetles are going to beat the wax moths.
They can both be pretty vile. So Paul wrote into the chat box, and I'm not sure I know how to answer this. It says, tell me the best way to tell the difference between stored sugar water and nectar. you don't have sugar water on your hive. That would be the
Right.
best way to tell the
You
difference.
know, it's nectar.
When
no.
you turn your frame sideways and it falls out, it's nectar.
Well, not necessarily.
Yeah, don't you think?
Feed can
Well, if you haven't been feeding them.
Oh, wait a minute, they're arguing. What'd you agree on?
We didn't. We never agree. We agreed that I'm wrong.
No. I don't, is there a, haven't anybody come up with something?
Oh, I guess you
I
could
think-
taste it.
The nectar tastes better.
About scent.
Yeah, that might be it. Good.
Hey,
good.
if they're gonna store it, that's okay. They know what they're doing.
I think
And
you
then-
should get into a position where you're trying to figure out what is what. Like if it's in the brood boxes, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Sucrose is sucrose, and they're going to use it, right?
Yeah.
Right.
If
Correct.
it's in your honey supers, then you shouldn't have had the sugar water
Yeah,
on there in the
shouldn't-
first
yeah,
place.
You wouldn't be feeding with supers on.
Right.
Okay, we're moving on. Anthony says, he's got a preface on this. It says, I purchased 2 5-frame nukes and installed into new supers on April 18th. They are going through sugar syrup as well as starting to bring in pollen, and the bees seem super active and doing well. And this Saturday, I saw they were drawing comb in 2 frames on each side of the installed nukes. So he was happy with all that, and he goes on to his questions. Should I remove new cells that are hanging below the original nuke frames? I found a couple of instances of this in both brood boxes. I have removed them so far, hoping they continue building into the new frames. He does not say that these are queen cells. I think he's just talking about building drone cells low on the frame. Should those be removed? Guys have an opinion?
If it's in the bottom box above the, right above the bottom board on the frames right there, the bees use that comb down there as ladders to climb up on the comb. Otherwise, they have to walk all the way to the side of the hive and go up and over. So they're going to build that back as fast as you can tear it out.
See, so they have wings. Can't they just fly up?
Jump.
Can't they just fly?
I think most of all that stuff is for them that they don't have to they can walk up. Yeah, I agree.
So Anthony goes on and he says, I saw the start of a few, 3 or 4 queen cells in the lower part of the old frames in each of the supers. Should I remove these and if I see them, or let them play out? Hoping to stem their idea of swarming, they still have 4 or 5 frames to work with.
Yeah. You say there's swarm cells starting on the bottom.
He said, I saw the start of a few, 3 or 4 queen cells. So queen cells or queen cups.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What I've always heard is if you're going in your hive and you're starting to see 20 or 30 of those cups, they're thinking about jumping ship at some point.
I
If
like
they're
Paul
queen
Post.
cells, and I tell people, if you pull a frame out and you see a queen cells, drawn queen cells, do a full inspection. Don't just start ripping things out. And I hear that all the time. I had queen cells and I tore them all out. Well, you're not going to change their mind. Those little girls have got it in their heads to go, and they're going to go one way or the other. So then you just evaluate your hive and decide what you're going to do later on. Yeah.
Paul Post says they're checking travel brochures. I thought that was good. Looking to travel. So we have one in the chat box. Let's see if I can read this. It says, so I'm getting a nuke and I already got my scholarship bees. This is from Lincoln. Will the hive rob my nuke because they are going strong? Miss Jolie, who is our All Things Youth Scholarship, does Lincoln have a worry?
Well, he should have an entrance reducer on his hive with the nuke.
We can't.
Let's see.
You're cutting out a little bit.
Am I?
No,
So,
that's
There you
better.
go.
Now you're good.
that's good. So, what do you think, Cecil? If he's concerned about it, I would make sure and use a reducer. Don't use the entrance feeder. Use a hive top or frame feeder. I don't know. It's his package should be strong enough by now. It should be equal to the nuke, actually.
If he's getting a nuke now and he got his package
A
a
month.
month ago,
Yeah,
I wouldn't.
They're both established.
Yeah, they're about the same.
Yeah, right. Yeah, they should be about equal.
I wouldn't think it'd be. I don't think it would be a worry. So
And like-
that's my thought.
And
LinkedIn
we
is
always
pretty
teach, you know,
good,
leave that
really, that has your
entrance reducer on till
For your-
you got a full bottom box rocking and rolling, then you can remove it. I think that's kind of what we've always said. You guys agree with that? I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's what we've always preached. You don't want to give it, once they get established that much in the bottom box, they can protect it. They can go to the bigger opening.
So Mike has kind of a happy story for us, but it's kind of one that he said was a mystery. And he said in mid-December, I thought I had lost one of my strong hives. I saw no bees in the hive until yesterday. Today, there are maybe 200 plus bees on the front of the hive going in and out. In December, I opened the top of the hive and looked at the entrance feeder. I put in an empty honey super on the top of the stack. So the sugar water in the jar was down a little, but not very much. So I thought, yep, they're all dead. So what happened? Were they really there and he just missed them? Or since I thought they were dead but he never checked it out, or does he have a swarm move in?
It's inside the hive, not on the entrance.
Look inside. Look inside.
I don't know. I guess all the above.
It is one of those, yeah, it could be. It would be. Yep, that's a possible.
When I do my winter inspections, if I don't see bees at the top, I carry a flashlight. I look down in there to see if they're in the bottom box moving around. I'm not going to crack open boxes. So I just look down there with a flashlight. Works great.
Yeah, they're shiny. You can see
Yeah,
their
I can see 'em
exoskeleton.
moving. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Bruce, tell him what you do.
Yeah.
Bruce Lane, tell him what you do in the winter. He's got to take his mute off. He goes around with a stethoscope.
Oh, a stethoscope.
took a
Yeah, I've
break.
heard of people
Use a
doing that.
stethoscope, or I'll put my ear right up against the wood. You can hear. when
Right, I use a stethoscope or I
Yeah.
stay at home and stay warm.
And some of them use that infrared heat thing to see where they're at.
Right.
I use a flashlight. It's a lot cheaper.
Early in the winter, they should be in the bottom, and it would be a flashlight to show them up because they're not going to chimney up that fast.
Well,
Hope not, anyway.
it sounds like to me he may just have bees visiting and robbing it out if he's only got a couple hundred. But it's
Well,
possible.
he said he saw that in the front. He said he saw a couple of hundred, but again, yes, that
got
is a
to open it up.
possibility. And that is for every person. I had someone else this week say that they didn't know whether the hive was queen right or not. They had looked in the top box and there were bees in there. And I said, you didn't look in the bottom box? No. I don't know.
Well, let's hope it's queen right.
Yeah, you have to look. You just have to look.
We frequently had swarms move into all our equipment that's laying around. So we could have had a swarm move into him.
Yeah. And I've heard of people leaving equipment out and they get swarms in them. That happens. I
Yep.
would think it'd be more than 200 bees, but
Yeah.
Well,
It's a secondary
wanted to
swarm,
just-
huh?
that's what he'd seen on the bees on the front of the hive. So there was about 200, but if you don't get in it, you just have
You
to.
just don't know.
Yeah.
Let's
You
see, what
gotta
is
do
the
your
African
inspection.
proverb? You have to face the bees. You have to go.
You gotta do your inspection but I'm not for sure I'd leave an open hive out there for wax moths and small hive beetles to take
No.
over and
Mhm.
tear it up. I would get it inside and clean it up and go from there. That's just me.
Well, I think we have made it through all of the questions that were submitted, and we hope this would be about an hour. And look, it's about 8 o'clock, so we've done an hour. So what else? Anybody have something they want to? We said we would talk about kind of spring management. Do we have something for the good of the cause, or something that somebody would like to bring up for?
But I have a question.
Okie dokie.
It's just kind of a weird thought that I had. So let's say early spring, you're doing some inspections, reversing boxes. You're not seeing a lot of drones, and probably not seeing any drones, but you start seeing queen cells, swarm cells. Do the bees or do the queens or does anybody, I mean, do they know that there are drones out there in a drone congregation area?
So typically, your bees aren't going to swarm unless they have drones.
Okay.
But if it's that early in
Yeah,
the
but I'm
spring,
talking
is
about
it
non-typical
swarm
because
or-
you're going in early.
Is that swarm behavior or is that supersedure behavior? Were you
Right.
losing a queen?
I'm
Exactly.
saying the swarm cells are on the bottom. They're
Oh.
drawing it out.
Yeah, I
I
would
mean, is
say
that, do they have any? I guess my question is, do they have a sense that they know that the queen can be mated?
yes, they do typically, and
Mhm.
that's why they don't want to produce queens until they have drones on the way. And so
Right.
you'll always see drones in stages starting before they start queen
Okay.
cells for swarming, for example. I mean, if they're
Yes.
desperate for a queen, they may try to make one too early, and there won't be any boys out there to mate with. But
Right. That's why I just wondered if, for some reason, even on a supersedure, would they know that there's, it's not just their hive, but other, I don't know. That
Yeah.
was kind of just a weird thing I was thinking about. I know it's weird.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That year we had the really warm weather. Remember, was it February 28th that I posted that? I had swarm cells, a couple swarm cells. That colony had plenty of room. It had 2 full frames of brood. The queen had a gorgeous laying pattern. They had plenty of room, and yet there's these 2 swarm cells at the very bottom, and they were capped. And I had the eyes on the queen, and she was laying fine. So I elected to cut those capped swarm cells out because I knew that it was going to be lethal for both the swarm colony plus the one that stayed home.
Yeah,
And they finally discharged about late March. They ended up putting a queen cell in the bottom box in my, the slatted rack area. And they built another one and they swarmed successfully in late March, but it gave them that much more time to get more drones out there. And it successfully requeened itself. But
And I have noticed for those people that if you buy a nuke, and most of the time when you buy, or at least this year has been exceptional, all my splits, I constantly had to take queen cells out because I've already made the splits. That's just something they do. And so I just take them out. I don't want them to take a chance. Normally that queen will take everything out, but I just help her out. So if you buy a nuke and your queen's doing what you're supposed to do and you see queen cells, just take them out.
And sometimes if you leave that, the queen will actually take them out. They may start a cell, but the queen will get rid of them. We have one more question on the chat, just came in. It's from Dave, and he says, I have excess hive comb with honey and pollen. How should I store them? Enviable position, Dave. Joe, what do you think? I haven't heard from you in a while.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I store them. You can freeze them if you have the luxury of a freezer big enough to hold all that, or store it 2 or 3 brood boxes deep, put a layer of newspaper on top or a paper plate, and put a couple of tablespoons of moth crystals. And someone is going to have to pronounce the ingredient that we want, because I
Paradichlorobenzene.
yeah, there you go. And
Mothballs.
Yeah, not mothballs.
different ingredient.
Yep.
And that's what and then put a hive top body underneath, or no, hive top lid, the telescoping lid underneath, and something on top like another lid, and just leave it stored there and it'll be good to go. Make sure that you've got everything tight so the mice can't get in there and the moths won't want in there.
Dave, you just need more hives. You just
There is
need-
one other answer.
You just
Okay.
need more
You can
beehives.
you can give it to a good friend like me, and I'll use it.
You're always helpful, Steve.
Hey, that's what I'm here for.
Robert added a good bit of information about paradichlorobenzene in the chat room. He says it is a chlorinated aromatic hydrocarbon. That's pretty technical, Robert.
Oh, I knew that.
it's a fumigant, insecticide, and repellent. And he said
The hydrocarbon.
from a solid to a gas, a process called sublimation. And the target organisms are molds, mildews, and insects. But paradichlorobenzene can be toxic to people and other animals. That's from Wikipedia and Robert. And it shouldn't be used frivolously. It is serious medicine. And
Yeah.
I understand you should also have your hives have a chance to air out before you actually use them if you've used paradichlorobenzene.
And if I can add, if I were to use it, I would use it in the fall up until we get a hard freeze, and then I stop.
Yeah. Because once it
That's
freezes,
gone.
you don't need it. You're right.
And
the
also,
Black we'll
if
be
you-
riding up and coming up with the warm weather sometime this month. So usually we're clear until mid to late May.
I think it helps keep other critters out of there too.
and let it air out before you use it.
I'd agree.
Lincoln has asked, where do you put the queen cells when you cut them out of the hive? My chickens
mouth.
like them.
Robert eats them.
Yeah, Robert eats them. Robert eats them.
That's the freshest royal jelly you're ever going to get.
Yep.
Okay.
You can make if you're using the wax foundation, you can cut out around them and use them to requeen something or make a split with it. Right?
If you
Robert?
don't damage the queen cell cut.
Yeah, if you don't damage it, yeah.
If you're very careful, but usually I'm not. It just goes.
Have you ever used those in swarm traps, Robert, or anything?
No, but sometimes what I'll do is I'll
Pheromone?
try to collect them, and if I don't eat the royal jelly, I'll put them in the freezer and store them, and maybe if I want to use them in grafting.
Grafting, yeah.
Oh, to use the royal jelly?
Yeah, I was getting confused with queen pheromone on like a old queen or something, but no, the royal jelly, you use it when you can graft.
Okay.
You save enough of it.
If there's an egg or larva in it, I don't like to eat. Well, there's no egg, but it's larva, and usually I can get the larva out of it, or you can roll it on your tongue and decide to pop it on the roof of your mouth and swallow it, or swallow it whole.
He likes it.
I'll pass.
Okay.
Can you
Well-
use it on toast?
Yeah.
Someone put it, ooh. I'm sorry, Robert. Ooh.
Is it good with a bagel, Robert?
That's good.
Okay, Dave is also asking, where can I where can I sell my excess honey wholesale? I have an excess of 10 to 20 gallons per year. Oh, Dave, we should talk.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Actually, members can put free ads in the newsletter.
That would good solution right there. That's
Yeah.
good.
There's a lot of people making mead. They'll take it. They like that. They like bulk.
They sure do.
You need more friends. You'll get rid of that honey.
Yeah, you don't have to label it. You don't have to put it in a bottle. There's all kinds of perks to
You don't
that.
have to pay sales tax.
Yep.
Very good. So our next meeting is a real meeting, and somebody says they want a forum. I'm not sure what. Okay, we'll talk about that. Our next meeting is coming up in just a couple of weeks. Robert, do you remember what day it is? May. Let me look at the calendar.
May 18th.
May 18th. And
2
at this
weeks.
time, we will be doing a Zoom meeting again. Steve, why don't you tell us what you've got planned for our next Zoom meeting? I know you teased us with Matthew a little bit.
Well, I think Cheryl and Becky are going to give us an update on their 3 projects they're doing on some nukes and a walkway split, and what's the other one?
The mated queen and the queen
Yeah.
cells.
There you go.
The grafted queen cells.
Yeah. Robert Burns will be doing one on grafting or queen rearing. Matthew Mertz, he's going to do on when it's time to super, when you should be putting supers on and when you shouldn't be putting supers on. And then Ed and I will be doing a video on how to go through an inspection and just a start to finish going through your hive.
That sounds like a full meeting. Very good.
Well, I'm trying to get, we have all these meetings and we have all this, and sometimes even our beekeepers that have been doing stuff for 2 and 3 years are still not quite doing things right. And so what I'm hoping we can clear a lot of these issues up. It's I guess probably the one thing that I see when I go out, and I've seen it I don't know how many dozen times, is you go into their hive and they never push their frames together, and you go in there and there's comb everywhere and it's horrible. They've drawn out, and then what happens is they draw so much out that you can never push them back together. So if you do, you're killing something, and hopefully not your queen. So that's the biggest issue that I see with a lot of beekeepers. Push those frames, and I tell my scholarship kids, I said, if you do an inspection and you put it up and you walk away and you go, oh, I forgot to push those frames together, I tell them, you march back over there, take the top off, and you push those frames back together, because it doesn't take them very long to turn it into a mess. So, clean the propolis off the sidebars, make them fit,
Okay.
make them tidy, make them do what you want them to do.
My beetle can get in there and cause a mess too in that area, because they can't get in there and protect that comb where it's all smashed against the other frame.
Oh, I know. It just gets,
Oh,
it's just a mess. And I see it all the time, most of the time. And you can usually tell if when you start with nukes and packages, you have to check those frames to make sure they're not bridging it. Don't let them do it. Tear it out. That's just, but we're going to kind of go through all that stuff. How to get that frame out, how to lift it straight up, doing all that stuff. So just kind of a basic because you should be doing a lot of inspections at this point. Getting close. If you got nukes or packages, that's what you'll be doing.
Out every 7 to 10. So to plug our neighbors to the north, Judy Wu and her crew up at the University of Nebraska did a virtual field day this last week, and I think they recorded it. If you are looking for something else to look at, well worth your time. They did a really nice job of it and did some things that I wouldn't have thought of even attempting, but it was some good stuff. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Unless somebody else has something for the good of the cause, I think we're done here this evening.
Lincoln had a question.
Thanks, Becky.
Becky.
Oh,
Thanks,
I'm sorry, I
Robert.
missed it.
Thanks, everybody.
Question about propolis. He's got some scholarship bees and they haven't put any propolis. It kind of early, isn't it, for first colonies? Is this in a package install? I don't see them put out a lot of propolis initially until they're established.
It is
Thank Jolie.
package.
What?
It's a package on new equipment, so there won't be much propolis for a while. Yeah.
That's
I
normal.
think it's not much propolis that we would see. That doesn't mean they're not putting some propolis down, but it'll be thin and yeah.
And they're really more concerned with wax, building out the wax on
Yeah.
their frame.
More in fall.
This is a good thing.
Okay. Let's see. Robert says, would you like me to put a link here in the comments? Oh, that would be great. Latest video in any KBA or just wait. Robert, oh, he wrote that to me. Robert, thumbs up. That would be awesome. So,
Becky,
okay,
we're doing
folks.
this the first Monday of every month, right?
That's up to everybody. You know what? There's some nice comments here. Some people have said that they felt like this was valuable.
I
Keep
think
those
it's great. It'll be
questions coming.
it'll be a different time of the season. There'll be different questions. So
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Well, we'll plan to for the near future until we can really meet. That would be good. All right.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Good
Signing
night,
off.
everybody.
Thank you.